Hello and welcome to lecture number 2. This is me, Catherine Creech, and my cat, Callie, and today we are going to talk about how biologists study life. So, first thing that we do is start with the smallest unit of life, and that's the atom. Now, if you're made of atoms, we say that you're made of matter. All matter is made of atoms and has mass, which means that it takes up space in the world. If you're made of atoms, that's not enough to be counted as alive. We already know that there's 7 characteristics of life. That was our lecture for the first week. But everything that is living is still made of atoms. So here's this beautiful atom. It's got the green electrons outside. They have a minus on them because they're negatively charged. It's got the blue positive positrons inside, and then these orange, red colored neutrons that are inside as well. So the protons and the neutrons, that makes up the nucleus. And the electrons hang out on the outside in these circles called orbitals. We used to draw all of our atoms like this, but it turns out that's not actually how atoms exist in the world. It's not super organized like this. It's still organized, but it's a little bit more haphazard. So now we draw atoms like this. We still have the protons and the neutrons in the nucleus in the center of the atom, but the electrons, which are purple now, are like zigging, zagging around the outside of the nucleus. So instead of being in these perfect circular orbitals, we now say that there's an electron cloud outside your atom. So atoms, smallest unit of a pure substance is an element. If we have more than one atom, we have a molecule. So this is a molecule being shown. It's called DNA. It's one of our biological molecules, which you know about from this week's reading. There's a difference between a molecule and a compound. Molecules are made of more than one atom, but if the atoms are different types, like oxygen and hydrogen bound together, then we call it a compound. So oxygen gas, 2 oxygen atoms bound together, that's a molecule. But water, that's H2O, that would be a compound. This DNA is made of atoms, and if we have a bunch of molecules inside of a unit in a cell, we call it an organelle. So we're going from smaller to larger. An atom is smaller than a molecule. Molecules make up organelles. We say that organelles are membrane bound because they have a little bit of plasma membrane around them. We'll talk about that a lot next week. This organelle being shown is a chloroplast. All organelles have a similar function. So the function of a chloroplast is to harvest light and turn it into chemical energy in the form of sugar. Chloroplasts are really cool. We're going to talk about them later in the term, but they're usually green and they're what make plants appear green. Organelles are smaller than cells. You need 1 or more cell to be considered alive. That is the cell theory that we talked about last week. Here we have a fabulous plant cell. You can see the chloroplast organelles, the mitochondrial organelles. That's these little jelly bean things right here. We got a big old storage container for water inside of our plant cell. And then our plant cell has a cell wall going around the outside right here. That cell wall is made of a biological molecule that we'll have read about in our textbook. So a bunch of cells together, getting even bigger now, is called a tissue. Plants have tissues just like you have tissue. Here we see a couple different types of plant tissues. We have the skin of the plant that's called the epidermis, just like your skin's called the epidermis. We have vascular tissue inside the plant. This is how your plant carries water and sugar around inside of itself. So your plant tissue is a bunch of cells that work together for the same function. Even bigger than tissue is an organ. Here's an organ for a plant. It's a leaf. Have you ever thought of a leaf as being an organ before? It's kind of trippy if you're not into plants as much as I am. So here's a beautiful organ. It's got a bunch of tissues working together for a single function. The function of this is to pull in oxygen, make sugar, and to exhale carbon dioxide. That's what leaves do for plants. Oops, wrong way. The organs organize together, either physically or chemically, into an organ system. The organ system for our plant example is all the above ground portions of the plant. The above ground portions of a plant, they try to harvest sunlight to make sugar, and then later they'll give the sugar to the rest of the plant, which we can't see yet. For you as a human, one of your organ systems would be like your cardiovascular system. That's all of your blood vessels and your heart together. So that's physically conjoined. If you want an example of a chemical organ system, we have the endocrine system. So you make a lot of hormones in your brain, but you also make hormones in your chest and in your throat and in your gonads. And those places are not physically connected necessarily, but they all work together. Then we have our organism, one living individual. So for our plant, this is an acacia tree. We have the roots, we have the shoots, we've got the leaves, the trunk. That is our whole critter. Very exciting. So we often think that science kind of ends at the organism, right? Because if you study molecules, then you're a microbiologist, or if you study cells, you're a cellular biologist, and if you study organisms, we just say you're a biologist, but you actually can get bigger than that. If you have more than one organism, so here's one organism, but if you have more than one organism in one place at one time, we call that a population. So here's a bunch of acacia trees hanging out together in one place at one time. If you start looking at more than one species in one place at one time, then you have a community. So here is a bunch of grazing animals and my acacia tree and the grass, all those living things together, a community. If you start to incorporate things like non-living components like this rock or the sunlight or the oxygen or the temperature or how much rainfall this area gets, then you're looking at the ecosystem. So population is just one type of species. Community is more than one species, but everyone is still living. And an ecosystem is the living and the non-living things together. Our ecosystems kind of blend together, like it's hard to tell where the desert ends and starts becoming something else. And if we look at all of our ecosystems, then we have the biosphere, which is our planet, this beautiful blue ball right here. So that's how we organize life, how we think about things, and how we look from the smaller end of life to the larger end of life. But we also need to categorize all this life. Scientists, we generally break things into three major groups. We call those groups domains. It's the largest group, life, and life is organized into domains. We have three: bacteria, archaea, and eukarya. So bacteria and archaea, those look really similar. They're small, they're unicellular, they're usually shaped like a rod or sphere, and they generally act like bacteria. The main difference between archaea and bacteria is that archaea are found in extreme environments, like the geothermal pools in Yellowstone or at the bottom of the ocean in the Mariana Trench. That kind of environment is an archaea environment. Eukarya, that's our group. So the main difference between these three is that bacteria and archaea are prokaryotes. The prefix pro means before, and then karyote refers to the nucleus in the cell. So these existed before the nucleus evolved. So prokaryotes do not have a nucleus. Eukarya, we call them eukaryotes. Eu means true, and karyo means nucleus. So they have a true nucleus. So eukaryotes all have nuclei inside of their cells. Nuclei are where we keep our DNA. So you're a eukaryote, you have cells with a nucleus, and inside that nucleus there's DNA. Now we break these domains up even further. When we break them up further, we call them kingdoms. And currently we subscribe to the 6 kingdom definition of life. That means that our kingdoms are animals like birds and bugs and cats, plants, which you can think of as just plants, but like grass and ferns, fungi, which is a really big and complicated kingdom that I'd love to talk to you about, protists, which is any single cellular eukaryote. So here they're showing an amoeba, and then inside the amoeba is the nucleus. If it has a nucleus, you know it's a eukaryote. And then we have our 2 groups of bacteria, our eubacteria and our archaeobacteria. So that's the bacteria group and the archaea group. We like to show these on trees because we can kind of visualize who's related to who. So a bunch of bacterias, bunch of archaeas, and then over here in eukarya, we've got animals and fungi and plants, and they're a little bit closer together, bunched together, than something like the flagellates, which is right here. That's a little more removed. And we have these beautiful trees, which you'll learn how to make and understand in 213, but they're totally not the whole story. This is the whole story. This is life on Earth. And it's fabulous because it's huge and it's complex, and everything in blue is a bacteria. So most of the living things on Earth are bacteria. Then in green, we've got archaea. So that's everybody else. And then this tiny sliver of the pie of life, that's eukarya. We have plantae, which is plants, amoebozoa, which are protists. Here's our fungi. And then you and I, we exist somewhere over here in a smaller group because we're a really small example of all the life on Earth. So that is how biologists organize life and look at the different hierarchies of life. Thank you for watching, and I will talk to you later.